In 1925, T.S. Eliot published a poem called The Hollow Men, which included this line: "This is the way the world will end, not with a bang, but a whimper." Well, God knows whether that's going to happen, and I mean that literally, in relation to the end of the world. If the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, is anything to go by, I don't think it will be a whimper. When it comes to history, there's lots of questions over that. But when it comes to storytelling, there really aren't. It's a bit of a crime against the narrative art if you end a story with a whimper rather than with a bang. And I would suggest that it's an even greater crime against storytelling if you begin a story with a whimper rather than with a bang. So in this video, I want to share with you some ways in which you can start your story, whether it's a fictional story or a memoir, an autobiography or a biography, in other words, a factual story, with a bang. And I'm going to suggest 4 explosive ways in which you can do that. And I'm going to use the 2018 novel by Delia Owens, Where the Crawdads Sing, as a great example of best practice when it comes to starting your story with a bang. There really are 4 essential ingredients or explosives, if you will, if you want your story to start with a bang. And the first is much neglected. All of these 4 explosives begin with the letter P, and the first one is the word place. You need a compelling place. When you start your story, I want you to think very, very hard and very deeply about the setting of your story. I've already indicated that this is something that storytellers and YouTube coaches, in my humble opinion, ignore to their peril. Setting and a compelling place is vital in the establishing of a very strong opening, or what I call the art of the start. When we come to Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, the whole novel actually is a masterclass in how to describe a compelling place. Delia Owens, who wrote and published her novel, her best-selling novel, when she was nearly 70, used to go to the marshlands of North Carolina as a child. And it's from that reservoir of her own childhood experience that she plunders this sense of compelling place, because pretty well the entire novel is set in this very exotic, strange, and in some ways quite mystical place, the marshlands of North Carolina. And what you get a sense of is a liminal sense of place, liminal from the Latin limen, meaning threshold. This is a place that's kind of situated between the civilized and the wild, if you will. And it's a frontier type of landscape where the hero grows up in an edifice that's no more than a shack. So we start with a compelling place, and that's very important, whether you're writing a memoir, whether you're writing a novel, whatever kind of story you're writing. I want to encourage you to start with a compelling place. Let's look at an example from the first 2 pages of Delia Owens' novel. The morning burned so August hot, the marsh's moist breath hung the oaks and pines with fog. The palmetto patches stood unusually quiet except for the low, slow flap of the heron's wings, lifting from the lagoon. Ma always looked back where the foot lane met the road, one arm held high, white palm waving as she turned onto the track, which wove through the bog forests, cattail lagoons, and maybe, if the tide obliged, eventually into town. Kaya was the youngest of 5, the others much older, though later she couldn't recall their ages. They lived with Ma and Pa, squeezed together like penned rabbits in the rough-cut shack, its screened porch staring big-eyed from under the oaks. But the second explosive ingredient, if you want to start your story with a bang, is a compelling protagonist. Somebody who exacts and elicits your interest straight away. Now, in Delia Owens's case, the genre of this novel is not, as some people have indicated, a murder story or a whodunit or a psychological thriller. It's none of those things. It's actually what's called a Bildungsroman, or a coming-of-age story. We have a very young girl called Kaya, who is the protagonist of the entire story. And at the beginning of this fine novel, she is left seriously isolated, vulnerable, and alone through the actions of her mother. So right away, our empathy is being harnessed because this is a hero that we want to cheer for. This is somebody that we relate to. This is a very ordinary person hurled into extraordinary situations. In extremis, this little girl's going to grow up and have to grow up very fast in this compelling place, this very challenging natural landscape of the marshlands of North Carolina. Let's have a look at an example from Delia Owens's first 2 pages, again, to examine best practice when it comes to the art of the start. And then Kaya, only 6 at the time, heard the screen door slap. Standing on the stool, she stopped scrubbing grits from the pot and lowered it into the basin of worn-out suds. No sounds now but her own breathing. Who had left the shack? Not Ma. She never let the door slam. But when Kaya ran to the porch, she saw her mother in a long brown skirt, kick pleats nipping at her ankles as she walked down the sandy lane in high heels. The stubby-nosed shoes were fake alligator skin, her only going-out pair. Kaya wanted to holler out but knew not to rouse Pa, so opened the door and stood on the brick-and-board steps. From there she saw the blue train case Ma carried. Usually, with the confidence of a pup, Kaya knew her mother would return with meat wrapped in greasy brown paper or with a chicken, head dangling down. But she never wore the gaiter heels, never took a case. The third thing that I think is really important if you want an explosive opening, if you want to begin with a bang rather than a whimper, is not just a compelling place, and not just a compelling protagonist, but it's a compelling plot. So what do I mean by that? I mean that you need something in the first few pages of your story that excites the reader, that arouses the interest of the viewer, if it's a screenplay, so deeply and so intensely that they want to watch more, or if they're reading, that they want to read more. Now, what sorts of things evoke that level of intense rapport with the plot? I would suggest 2 things: dread and desire. So your main hero or character, their fundamental desire and their fundamental dread need, I think, to be hinted at very early on. And this is true if you're writing your own testimony in the form of a memoir, that the things that you long for and the things that you're most afraid of, they need to be indicated quite early, I would suggest, if you want to start with a bang. So in the case of Where the Crawdads Sing, even within the first 2 pages, these 2 things, the hero's desire and the hero's dread, are flagged up. What we have is a sense of impending doom, that young Kaya's mother has walked out, but this is not just walking out to go away for a few days for a break from her husband, who's abusive and alcoholic, but actually the clothes that she's wearing and the suitcase that she's carrying indicate to Kaya that this is a permanent departure. And of course, dread begins to surface in Kaya's life. There's a sense of fear, the fear of abandonment, the fear of being isolated and having to live alone. And then there's also the desire, the longing of her heart, which is for her mother's love, for that comfort, that nurture, that presence that would offset and form an antidote to the toxin of the fear that she is experiencing. So let's have a look at the first 2 pages of Where the Crawdads Sing, and let's look at an extract and ask ourselves the question, does Delia Owens give us enough in the plot to compel us to read on? Is there enough about Kaya's dread and desire here, even in the form of hints, to make us want to invest our time and energy in this story? Jody, the brother closest to Kaya but still 7 years older, stepped from the house and stood behind her. He had her same dark eyes and black hair, had taught her bird songs, star names, how to steer the boat through sawgrass. "Ma'll be back," he said. "I don't know. She's wearing her gator shoes." "And Ma don't leave her kids. It ain't in 'em." The fourth and final ingredient or explosive, if you want to start your story with a bang, is in addition to a compelling place, in addition to a compelling protagonist, in addition to a compelling plot, is number 4, compelling prose. Now, I think it's really important that you work hard and I work hard to startle the reader right from the earliest pages of your story, and particularly from the first sentence onwards, with a sense of how beautiful and how finely written this prose is. Now, that can come in the form of an interesting, original, fresh and unusual voice in which the story is told. It can come also in the form of metaphorical resonance, of a use of language which suggests that this story has different levels. I talk about multi-story stories. So we have in the UK multi-story car parks on different levels in one high-rise building. Many countries have that. It's not just unique to the UK, obviously. But I think stories need to have a certain element of that multivalence too, that stories need to be multi-story. So yes, you can read a story at one surface level and enjoy it, and it can be a kind of escapism for you. But the best stories, it seems to me, resonate at different levels, and particularly through the use of figurative language, through metaphor, through simile, where different kinds of associations and connections are set up, which then tap into the big ideas or the high concepts that the author is exploring in their story. So do make sure that you work at your prose and that you make your prose as poetic as possible. And by that I don't mean florid and flowery. I mean that you work at things like metaphor and simile without overusing and over-describing and overindulging in those literary devices, but that you use them sparingly in a way that strikes the reader that there is a symphony going on here, different levels in the harmony of the storytelling. Let's look at an example from the first 2 pages of Delia Owens's Where the Crawdads Sing, because her prose is truly compelling. "You told me that fox left her babies." "Yeah, but that vixen got her leg all tore up. She'd have starved to death if she tried to feed herself and her kits. She was better off to leave 'em, heal herself up, than whelp more when she could raise 'em good. Ma ain't starving. She'll be back." Jody wasn't nearly as sure as he sounded, but said it for Kaya. Her throat tight, she whispered, "But Ma's carrying that blue case like she's going somewhere big." Kingdom. But let's make sure that we master the art of the start and start our stories with a bang. Like John's Gospel, in the beginning was the Word. What an amazing opening that is. What an extraordinarily deeply compelling hook that is. The Bible as a whole, his greatest story ever told, begins with the most magnificent example of the art of the start. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I mean, you don't get more of a once upon a time than that, except that this is not fantasy. This is reality. This is history. So try those 4 things. Start your story with a bang, not with a whimper. And I pray that this video has really helped you in that. And I want to say, let's all resolve to live luminously and write radiantly, to write in the light. Let's learn from geniuses like Delia Owens, and let's learn from videos like this. And if you've liked this video, please subscribe. Press that subscribe button, press the like button if you would. All the support you can give would be most appreciated. And share this with your friends. And in the meantime, I pray every blessing on you as you start your story with a bang.